All right. We're also recording this, so here, let me go back to sharing my screen or video. We're recording, so if anybody has trouble getting on, of course, that's a total bummer, but it will be available on our YouTube page, so we'll be able to do that. Oh my God, exciting! Okay, there's some more exciting composting news. All right, let's get started. So, does that sound good? Everybody ready to get started? We got a lot of people in here, yeah? Cool. Okay, so thank you all so much for taking the time to attend this very special event, webinar, and conversation with Erin and Emanuel of Armada Unified. And a big thank you to Emanuel and Erin for being here. My name is Alicia Papanek. I'm a nutritional science student, and I'm here today representing the Edible Garden Club of Cal State LA, the co-organizers of this event, along with ASI's Environmental Policy Committee. Before we start, I just want to acknowledge all of the hard work that the Edible Garden Club put into making this event possible. Many of our club members are here today, and it's so wonderful to see you all, including our board, who I'll briefly introduce. If you guys can wave or do a hand clap or something so people know who you are. We have Andrea Dominguez, Rachel Rady, who I think is, she's in her car, so she's having some connection issues. Estefania Ramos, Ashley Lepe, Megan Garvey, and Hannah Valley of the EPC. She's our Environmental Policy Committee ASI representative. So our club's mission is to grow food on the Cal State LA campus for the purpose of empowering student connections to environmental stewardship, food access, and community health. As we envision, develop, and implement plans at our new edible garden site in campus housing, the absolute first step to that process, which many of you saw today on our Instagram, is to get the compost system going. So for our club's first ever campus-wide event, it's only fitting that we would bring you an event about compost. If composting is a new concept for you, we are so glad you're here. For those with some know-how on composting processes, we hope this helps to strengthen your relationship with the system and shed some light on things that you may not have known. One day when we're free to meet back on campus, we'll be able to host in-person composting workshops and support the composting needs of Cal State LA's campus and community. Until then, we hope this inspires you to compost at home, at your local community garden, or wherever you can. As we move through this presentation, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat box. At the end of the presentation, Erin and Emanuel will answer all of your composting, regenerative agriculture, and food justice questions. Now I'm going to hand the stage over to our Vice President, Andrea Dominguez, to let you know about today's raffle prizes and how to enter.
Oh, wait, sorry. What is it? The next slide is actually going to be Hannah introducing the Environmental Affairs Commission.
Awesome. Awesome.
There you go. There you go. So take it away, Hannah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Valier. I'm part of the student government at Cal State LA. I'm the Environmental Affairs Commissioner, and I chair the Environmental Policy Committee. The Environmental Policy Committee seeks to formulate and encourage the adoption of policies to make Cal State LA more environmentally sustainable campus and educate the community on the topic of environmental sustainability and environmental justice. That's my email there. If anybody has questions about EPC or you'd like to know more. Could we go to the next slide? Thank you. EPC meetings are bi-weekly on Fridays at 2 p.m. We are still looking for committee members, so if this sounds interesting to you, please apply. Go to the ASI website and fill out an application. All of this information is on our Instagram page at CSULA EPC. Thank you all for coming today. We're really excited to have this event and be here today with the Edible Garden Club and Armada Unified. And Andrea, would you like to introduce the raffle prizes?
Yes, hi everyone. Let me just introduce myself. My name is Andrea Dominguez, and I am the co-vice president of the Edible Garden Club. My major is sociology with a concentration in inequality and diversity, and I'm also minoring in rehabilitation services. So now I'll be presenting the raffle prizes we have for you today. So yeah, today's raffle is made possible by ASI's Environmental Policy Committee. Hannah is going to drop a Google form in the chat, I think like in the next hour. So you guys can sign up over there, and you must be currently enrolled in Cal State LA to enter. So yeah. So to support our theme, ASI has sponsored this event by raffling off two $25 gift cards to Target, so you could buy groceries and all your needs over there, and one $50 gift card to Amazon. Our lovely VP, Rachel, had some wonderful Amazon recommendations in case you get inspired and you want to learn more about food justice after our speaker event. So the recommendations are a stainless steel compost bin, so you could start your composting journey. And this book that when we were talking to Armada Unified, like last month, I think, Emanuel told us about this book, and Estefania and Rachel were like, wow, this is actually really great. And it's very educational. And it's so, yeah. Let me see. So yeah, at the end, Hannah will announce the raffle winners at the end of the event. So be sure to stick around so you can win your prize. And now I'm gonna give this to Estefania to introduce our speakers for this afternoon.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, everyone. My name is Estefania. As Alicia mentioned, I am the secretary of the Edible Garden Club, and I am also a nutritional science major at Cal State LA. I just want to thank you all for coming, excited to learn and network with two experts in the field of urban gardening, as well as advocates for food justice. This event came into fruition when I connected with Erin Harris through the Smart Gardening program offered through LA County Public Works. Erin and Emanuel were very enthusiastic about supporting our club and helping us just to build an online community. They introduced me to Armada Unified, which they collectively started in March of this year as a way to respond to COVID-19. Armada is an urban farming nonprofit which focuses on teacher training to give educators the skills and knowledge to share with their students the importance of utilizing outdoor skills and creating community-oriented projects. They also offer a justice leadership program, which provides the next generation of young leaders with ways to develop their self-efficacy and provide them with resources to stand up for those in need. And last but not least, Armada offers food relief farming as a way to be proactive in the efforts of providing food security. In our first event was only going to include the basics of composting, but in our planning,
yeah, I'm gonna
Erin and
stay.
Emanuel,
They have it on.
Erin and Emanuel reminded us that in the times that we're facing, there is a pressing discussion of food sovereignty that needs to be addressed, while still going hand in hand with composting. Today, I'm very honored to hand over the floor to our guest speakers, Erin and Emanuel, so that they can tell you a little bit more about their individual backgrounds and officially kick off our event. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I just want to start by saying it's really inspiring to see such involved members of the student body. When I was in college, I was not involved with anything other than trying to pass my classes. So I just really do love seeing you all. So I was struck by that just now.
Yeah, and you guys clearly have a beautiful collective because all these smiling faces in attendance, that just speaks volumes to what you guys are doing, because you're not just going through the motions. You guys are very deliberate in terms of not only this webinar, but the movement in which you're creating. So we do thank you guys for extreme humility and just allowing us to be a part of it, because you're a part of our story, and we're fortunate enough to be a part of yours. So. But getting into our backgrounds,
okay. Well, Stefania mentioned how we came in touch, which was I do teach the Smart Gardening program for LA County, which is currently all online, just like everything else, although we used to do in-person workshops all over LA County. And so I do teach composting as well as organic gardening, water-wise gardening, and small space gardening, which we, the firm I work for, we advocated really hard for adding that to the curriculum this year, really very much touching upon everything we're talking about in terms of food access, food sovereignty. This program had traditionally really been only available to, you know, homeowners, people with yards, and really targeted in that manner. We want to make it a lot more accessible. So we're excited about that offering. My background beyond that, it's been, well, I've had so many careers at this point, but for probably the last 7 years or so, it's been really focused on garden education. So all ages, and now currently with adults. And Armada Unified just sprang forth from Emanuel's and my combined background and passion. So with me, that's going to be the agricultural education, regenerative gardening, urban farming, and I'm going to hand it off. I'll let you take it from here in terms of how we brought together our
Yeah. And full disclosure, Erin is by far the best agricultural educator I've met. And now that I am in Mud, if you guys know Mud Baron, he is one of a kind and he is a beautiful personality. So remember that name if you don't know him, Mud Baron. So outside of Erin and Mud, it's been such a pleasure to not only learn from them in the mind of other master gardeners as well, because with someone like me coming from corporate sectors, so human resources has been my background for the past 10 years. So employment law, employee relations, that's been my practice in trade. And I hope that none of you ever have to experience the climbing the corporate ladder, but I can tell you that it's not fun. And I got tired of playing that game because I've been in positions to where I've made good money. I've had great titles. And at the end of the day, it meant nothing because, you know, I wasn't fulfilled. Something was missing because I always knew that I personally had a passion for people. And we discuss this quite often. It doesn't really matter what the resource is, whether it be capital, funding, another hand to shake to get you through the door. It's always going to come from a person. So centering that understanding on people is what drives me personally, and that's what allowed Erin and myself to come together. And I stepped out of corporate America and stepped into the coaching and the mentoring space. I was blessed to speak to the Youth and Gun High School in Silicon Valley. I've been invited to a few workforce development conferences. I just did one roughly a month and a half ago. I did another segment called Modern Man, just really empowering individuals to be their best selves, because we can talk about everything in between on how to be the best person you can be, but that's very cliche and very surface unless you know what your purpose in life is. And that's our purpose in life. We help others find their purpose. So really tailoring our curriculum, our understanding, our life experiences to the people in which have the capacity to receive what we have. That's what gives us fulfillment, because through very different people, but the offering is the same when it comes to our common theme of just wanting to help people. So yeah, that's how Armada started. We saw an opportunity to help amidst COVID-19, and even though it was fairly unorthodox, it made beautiful sense because it didn't have to be cookie cutter in terms of how we're putting our practices and programs in place. It was us and ours. And the world is going to be receptive to that as long as it's coming from a place of love, ingenuity. So, you know, it's been ebbing and flowing a bit. We have a number of projects on the horizon, and we'll get to those. But just digressing, just letting you guys know, just to stay your course. You guys are in a great space. It's very intimidating, this space, is what I'm learning, because obviously Erin, in her capacity, intimidated me, and this is someone who is very confident in what he does, what he knows. But it's always something to learn, and that's what gives me solace personally when I'm in her presence. You know, speaking in reference to food systems, food sovereignty, food apartheid, everything in between. So yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a good introduction. As you can see, we are all trying to do a lot, and as we know you all are, and part of why we do tie in the personal development and the mental health and the emotional health to all of it is because if you're if you've committed yourself to living a life of purpose and, you know, being of service during the time you have here on earth, it all starts with that inner strength, you know, and really feeding yourself and surrounding yourself with people who feed you. So, but first let's talk about feeding the earth and feeding the soil. So we'll go ahead and we'll dive in because, you know, we do want to I'm going to just run through a brief composting lesson and demo. Alicia mentioned at the beginning, some of y'all may be new to composting, some may already be doing it. So this will definitely be the basics, but, you know, I just want to impart to you all the best practices, right? Set yourselves up for success if you do want to get started with composting. And then from there, we will broaden the discussion because it is so much more broad, but it's a great place to start because I love what Alicia was saying about, like, that's how you start the garden because it's all connected, right? It's that beautiful closed loop, and you do need to start. What's going on outside? You do need to start by feeding the soil. I always like to say during my webinars, you know, feed the soil feeds the plants, and the plants feed you. And I know I'm speaking all of your language when I say that, just based on where your passions lie. So let's go ahead and dive into composting. I have a little cheat sheet over to the side here, but my slideshow I can't show to you guys because it's property of LA County. And this is a non-county sanctioned event. But I'm just going to talk about two home composting systems, the backyard bin system and the worm system. There's different ways to compost. You know, if you lived on a farm or a ranch and you had all the space to do so, then you might just compost in a big pile. Some people simply choose to bury their food scraps. Some people use the bokashi method, which is something completely different that can actually handle meat and dairy in a home environment. But my area of expertise is really more around worm composting primarily. That's what we do here at home. And also the basics of backyard composting. So those two systems are really designed more for suburban or small space homes. So we live in a condo, so we have a worm bin on our balcony, for example. If you had a backyard with more space and you had a fair amount of vegetation, you might choose to go with a backyard bin because it can handle more volume. But what I really like to emphasize to everybody right from the beginning, a couple things. Both the backyard system and the worm system are designed to handle both food waste from your kitchen and yard waste. So it's not that one is for one and the other is for the other. That's a common misconception. Both systems can take food scraps and yard scraps. And then the other thing I like to really emphasize, and it may not be as relevant since we're speaking to the Edible Garden Club, but you don't have to be a gardener to compost, not at all. In that case, I really do recommend the worm bin system. It's perfect for handling your food waste. And I'll get into more detail about how to properly manage that so you don't run into any common issues there. But I always say the worm composting method is so efficient. Those little worms do such an incredible job at reducing the volume of your waste that you're not going to end up with so much vermicompost that you just don't know what to do with it. You know, you're going to end up with a fairly small amount, and that's very easy to use. So if you're not even a gardener, I say there's still no excuse not to have a worm bin on your balcony or your patio. You could even keep it indoors in a closet. And then even if you don't even have any potted plants, you could take your finished vermicompost and just dump it into a planter outside your building or at a park, you know, like everybody should be composting. So let me get into why, because I don't want to sound like I'm preaching without giving you the big why behind it. And there's a huge why behind composting, and you are a smart group of people, so many of you may already be aware of this, but I think a lot of people don't realize the role that organic waste in the landfill plays in greenhouse, global warming, greenhouse gases. So when you send organic waste to a landfill, so if you're not composting your waste, it's getting into your trash can, so whether that be your food scraps from your kitchen or your yard scraps, or your trimmings, whatever it may be, if that gets into a landfill, and buried in a landfill, that's what we call an anaerobic environment. So what's composting? Composting is basically decomposition, right? It's a natural decomposition process. It's an aerobic decomposition process with air, with oxygen. I like to use the example of an apple core. So if you take an apple core and you toss it into like the forest or a meadow or a field, it's going to decompose very quickly, right? It's going to break down, go back into the earth as it was meant to, as everything is meant to eventually. But when you send that same apple core to a landfill, it gets buried amongst all of the inorganic waste in the landfill. A couple things happen. One is that it takes much longer to break down. So you are contributing to the increasing volume of our landfill. So organic waste has no business being in there because it could have been diverted completely. And so A, it's filling them up quicker, right? And then B, what you have with that anaerobic decomposition process, when you don't have the oxygen flow needed, is the release of methane gas, as well as carbon dioxide. But methane is really the one we're really focusing on here because it's so potent at trapping heat in the atmosphere. And I'm terrible with numbers, so this is where I always pull up my little cheat sheet. But I have a few stats here. Methane is 28 to 36 times more effective than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the atmosphere over a long period of time. And by most estimates, let's see, food waste in LA County constitutes about 18% of what's going to our landfills. And when you add in yard waste, you get to about 40% of the volume of our landfills is composed of organic matter that could have been diverted completely. And that's, it's unacceptable, it's discouraging, but it's also hugely empowering, right? Because you look at that and you realize, oh, wow, if every single one of us started composting, we have an enormous potential to actually reduce greenhouse gases. And in fact, methane from the landfill is 14% of all human-related methane emissions. So hopefully, you know, it's a lot of stats to throw at you, but the upshot there is that composting can help slow global warming. Obviously, there is more contributing to it than that, but I think a lot of people don't make that connection. I know that I always used to look at it purely from that volume perspective, like, oh, let's divert it because our landfills are filling up, but I didn't realize that, oh, it's also contributing to global warming. It's also releasing a tremendous amount of methane gas. So that's the big, huge why behind composting. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do it, and I will do a little demo there instead of just staring at our faces this whole time. I do have a few talks. So in addition to the big environmental reason to compost, there's also a great selfish reason if you are a gardener, and that's that finished compost is a wonderful soil amendment, right? It's packed full of nutrients. It grows healthier, more resilient plants. It helps with soil structure. It helps with water retention. And it's a key component of regenerative gardening and regenerative agriculture, which there's a lot of buzz around that now, as there should be, because, you know, the methods we're using on, you know, this huge country, this huge continent of stolen land, right? And now so much acreage has been handed over to farmers, growing commodity crops and practicing resource depleting, stripping practices, really resource mining practices, producing commodity crops. You know, it's destroying, we're losing our topsoil. I think most people are probably aware of that. So we need to put it back. We need to start putting it all back. And that's where compost comes into play as well. It's feeding the soil. So let's talk about the basic components and maybe bit of compost. So there's basically 4 components to compost. And you can break that down into browns, greens, air, and water. That's your 4. And browns and greens really refer to the way we categorize what we're putting into our compost bin. Now this is going to apply to both the backyard method and the one bin method. So right now, these basics, they apply to both systems. Browns refer to carbon feedstocks and greens refer to nitrogen feedstocks. So that everything's carbon based, but the nitrogen feedstocks have a higher ratio of nitrogen. So those are your greens, and then you got your browns. And you really do want to keep the two roughly in balance over time. You want to have about 50-50% by volume of browns and greens. So that does mean you want to have both on hand. It doesn't mean that every time you empty stuff in your compost, you have to have equal parts of each. It just means that over time, you want to keep them in balance. So let's talk about what are browns and what are greens. So carbon inputs or feedstocks are going to refer to things that are drier and deader. And greens are going to refer to things that are fresher and closer to being alive. So most of our kitchen scraps, when I say kitchen scraps, I'm talking about fruit and vegetable trimmings. These compost systems aren't designed to handle meat and dairy. Really, all has to be plant-based, and then the only exception is really going to be eggshells. So eggshells can go in, but apart from that, it all has to be plant-based. So that includes paper products, and paper products are going to be a good example of browns or carbon. And you know I mentioned earlier that even if you don't garden at all, you can still have a worm bin. You need to be careful that at the same time that you're not only putting kitchen scraps in your worm bin, you're going to need to find some browns, some carbon. And that's where paper products come into play. So, paper bags will be a source of carbon. And I know a lot of stores now you can't bring your own bag. And I know that the group we're talking to is probably very good at bringing their own bags. But now that with COVID, you might end up with a lot of paper bags on your hand. It's a great feedstock for your compost. Dried leaves, these are fake, but these represent dried leaves. That would be a source of browns or carbon. Cardboard, so if you're getting a lot of deliveries from Amazon, those cardboard boxes, ideally you would cut them up first because that will help them break down quicker. Those can go in your compost as a source of carbon. As far as greens go, again, it's going to be your kitchen scraps. So the tops of strawberries, banana peels. Again, I have more fake stuff to show you. In real life, we wouldn't compost perfectly good edible lettuce, right? We would make sure it gets eaten. But just to give you an example of nitrogen, it's going to be kitchen scraps. So the banana peel would be a source of nitrogen. Coffee grounds, use coffee grounds, even though they're the color brown, that's a source of nitrogen. Freshly cut grass or leaves, freshly pruned leaves or freshly pulled weeds from your garden, these are going to be green. And then again, you're going to want to find more browns over time to balance it out. Just mostly keeping those two things in balance. The reason you want to keep them in balance is because if you go too heavy on your greens or your nitrogen, then you're at risk of it going anaerobic. It will get too wet. And it will start to smell like sewage, and you really want to avoid that. Now, if you go too heavy on the browns, it'll be too dry. It's really just going to slow the process down. So I had mentioned the 4 components. I said browns, greens, air, and water. So water really refers to the moisture level of your compost. You want to keep it at about the moisture level of a wrung out sponge. So not too wet, not too dry. Now, if you're really just mostly putting in browns and it's too dry, ideally you're adding more greens, but you could also add water. And then air. So it's important to have air circulation. I mentioned before it's an aerobic as opposed to anaerobic decomposition process. So you need to have air circulation, and that's where turning comes into play. So if you have a compost container, or maybe you do just have a pile, just make sure you're getting in there with a shovel or a pitchfork about once a week, turning it and helping to distribute. It heats up in the middle, and you want to spread that around. You want to move the parts from the outside into the middle, because that heat is what's that sweet spot between 130 and 150 degrees Fahrenheit is where all those microorganisms that are doing that work for you really thrive. So it is meant to heat up. This is just the backyard system. The worm system is not a hot composting system. And I'm going to go ahead and move right into worm composting just because I want to make sure we're making the best use of our time. So that's the basics of composting. That's what goes in. Browns, greens, turn it regularly, make sure it's damp and not too wet. Now with the worm bin, the key differences there are it's not a hot system, so it has to be kept in the shade at all times. Otherwise you can kill off your worms. It needs to be temperate. And also there's a couple things that go in the backyard bin that can't go in the worm bin. The main one's going to be citrus. It makes the environment too acidic for the worms. And then the other is going to be things like if you had the manure of an herbivore farming type animal, like a goat or a chicken or a rabbit, that could go in your backyard bin. It shouldn't really go in your worm bin. It's really high in nitrogen, and the nitrogen also contributes to the heating process. So worm bin, very similar inputs to the backyard bin, but the placement needs to be different. We call it worm compost or vermicompost, but you know, it's really more of a manure. It's worm castings, it's worm poop essentially, but it doesn't stink like poop. It's not nasty, although you've had a different experience with worm compost than I have.
Yeah, I actually, Mud, the gentleman that we discussed a bit earlier, I am also director of human resources for Community Healing Gardens, and he introduced me to worm poop in its liquid form. And,
oh, it was liquid.
Yeah, in its liquid form. So
maybe it was
he was pretty specific. He was like, it was worm poop. So however it was, he was able to distribute it in liquid form, whatever he added to it to liquefy it.
Okay.
But it was highly effective, and I saw the difference within 1 week from me going down to the Watts Healing Tech Garden and coming back. I think 2 weeks after that, we poured it on watermelons, and they just took off. So to Erin's point, it's a full-blown science to this, man. It's so much.
Yeah, it's really effective. Like worm compost, I would say, you know, it's hard to know exactly what the nutrient content is going to be of any compost because it depends what went into it. But worm compost it's really, really dense in nutrients. The big three, which are going to be nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, but also all sorts of micronutrients, also you know, beneficial fungi and bacteria, and also all these great enzymes from the worm's guts that come out. You know, like it's really valuable stuff. And in my experience, Finnish One Complex doesn't have an odor, but I feel like you've noticed an odor when you were using that stuff with mud.
Yeah, it smelled like poop.
My worm compost doesn't smell like poop.
Yeah, because obviously we do have it here, but it was a completely different experience, like burning the hairs out of your nose type experience. But again, it worked because we poured it on those watermelons and they blew up within like 2 weeks. So
we don't know the exact origins of that smelly compost, but it worked.
Mm-hmm.
But at least with these home composting systems, really generally speaking, it shouldn't have a foul odor. And yeah, I just say, like some people say, oh, worm poop, that's gross, but it's not gross. It looks and smells a lot like good rich topsoil. This is what, you know, finished backyard compost would look like. You can see it looks a lot like soil. It's brown and crumbly, nice earthy odor, and you know it's ready to harvest when it looks like this. With the backyard bin, there's different models available. You can purchase a tumbler where the whole thing's self-contained. It makes it easier to turn it. You could purchase just a bin that stands on the ground. You know, we often get questions about, well, how do I harvest finished compost if I'm continually adding new stuff in, which is a great question. In that case, with a backyard bin, I recommend, like if it's the kind with the door that slides up to the bottom, that after maybe a month or two, you don't dig in your new feedstocks as deeply, and you allow that bottom layer to finish, and you just scoop it out. The whole process with a backyard bin takes, it's 6 to 9 months if you're very actively managing it. So if you're following all the best practices, keeping your browns and greens in balance, keeping the moisture levels right, turning it, the smaller your inputs, the quicker they'll break down. But it could take longer. It could take 9 months to a year if you're not so on top of it. But that's okay. It's still going to happen. So I try to tell people, don't get too hung up on the speed of the process. Now, if you really do want to have a finished product sooner, then worm composting is great. It's a faster process. As I mentioned, highly efficient. You know, it just reduces your waste just like so much, which is very satisfying because, you know, we have our kitchen bucket and, so I can just show them. We have our kitchen bucket and, you know, we cook at home pretty frequently. So we've got a lot of trimmings and food scraps going into it. And I would say we probably fill it up. We probably dump it like once a week, would you say?
Yes.
Yeah, so we probably dump it about once a week. It's this big. And then the worm bin, which I did not bring inside because it's covered with spiders and spider webs, but it's probably about this big and this tall, so not huge. You know, it fits into a corner on our balcony. So consider that we're dumping this into a container about that size, the size of maybe like a desktop, right? Not a desk, like a school desktop, not a desktop computer. And we have a finished tray of compost to dump in the garden maybe a couple times a year, right? So it's just it's a huge reduction in waste, which is really satisfying and rewarding. And then, you know, as Emanuel mentioned, with his experience in Watts at the Healing Tech Garden and our own experience in our garden plot over here at our local community garden, and our container garden on the balcony grows, you know, healthier plants, like the plants bounce back to life. So it's just, you know, you can't tell. It's something that excites me because it's just the right thing to do, right? It's the right thing to do. And if you're a gardener, you do reap the rewards. You absolutely reap the rewards.
And just to speak to that really quickly, again, with me coming in to have unbiased eyes to support all she's saying, my biggest advice to those of you who are highly knowledgeable in this area and those of you who are not, be kind to yourself during the process. Because I've noticed that also from other master gardeners, other gardeners, everything in between, because there's a process that's laid out. And when the process doesn't go according to plan in your time windows, we begin to question ourselves, well, am I doing it right? But that's when one can really self-analyze the situation and ask yourself, well, it may not be wrong. Is it right where I'm doing? Or is my garden being too shaded, not getting enough sun? It can be a lot of things to factor into.
Is it anemic in the soil, but
it can
ate
be,
my roots? And,
yeah, so just be kind to yourself because, again, my biggest thing coming into this sector is that there's no ceiling. So there's always going to be, it's going to be so much to learn. And that's the overwhelming side of it, especially when you take it seriously, because anyone who loves what they do, we roll into this role of being perfectionists. But we can't be perfectionists in this space.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up because, you know, I know the topic is composting, but of course it relates so closely with gardening. And there's so much that's beyond your control. And it's a pet peeve of both of ours when you talk to somebody, a gardener, garden instructor who acts like they have all the answers, because you don't. Like really learning gardening, really learning farming, it's like learning a new language. And as Emanuel said, there's no ceiling, there's so much to learn. And one of my favorite quotes, you guys may have seen this floating around too. I think it's, I might be misquoting it, I don't even know where it originated, but if something besides you isn't eating your plants, then they're not part of the ecosystem. And, you know, in my organic gardening webinars, I teach IPM, I teach integrated pest management, and a key part of that is what we call biological pest management. So we have this neat little chart, and it lays out what each of the harmful insects are, and it lays out which of the beneficial insects each of the harmful insects. And I always present, I say, you know what, this is more an academic exercise than anything else, because you can't tell bugs what to do. And you can't tell ladybugs to come to your garden or to stay in your garden and eat the spider mites and the aphids and the mealybugs. It's useful to know how to identify what's on your plants and what may or may not need to be treated, but I always say, yes, growing healthier, more resilient plants by starting with good, healthy, well-amended soil, rich in compost and organic matter. That is going to grow healthier, more resilient plants, but it's not going to grow bulletproof plants. There's always going to be something that you're battling. And, you know, I always say actively, like learning to warfare, you know, once you're into don't get me started on gophers, like it's, you know, so it's always good to go into it with that sense of be ready for some failure. You know, I'm going to see if I can find the right word. I think we'd had a couple of drinks one night when we were talking about this, but I was like, yeah, man, and like the whole thing, if nothing's eating your plants, they're not part of the ecosystem. It relates to the human mind. And if you're not experiencing moments of pain and desperation and depression, then you're not part of the human ecosystem, you know, but it's true, you know, it's all true. Like, and so that, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it is really crucial that we be accepting of the failures that will come. And, you know, we, just like we can't hold ourselves to the standard of perfection all the time, we can't hold our garden or our compost pile to the standard of perfection all the time. So I do think that's worth noting. And probably, well, I do want to, it's a great segue, but I do want to go through just a little bit of troubleshooting, just in case, you know, those of you who start composting, just so you know what not to do. So I do want to mention what doesn't go into the compost. So no meat or dairy in these particular systems. You want to avoid putting in diseased or infected plants because, well, especially in a worm system, but in a backyard system too, it might not heat up enough to kill off these diseases, which might end up popping up again in your garden or showing up again. The same goes for invasive weeds or any type of seeds. So just be prepared for things that go into your compost to potentially rear their ugly head in your garden. So be mindful. Same goes for glossy or treated paper. So any types of paper you put in should be matte, you know, newspaper, cardboard, paper bags, that kind of thing. Glossy magazines. No cat or dog litter or feces whatsoever. So I did mention if you have rabbit or chickens, that can go into your backyard bin, not your worm bin. But no dog or cat poo should go into either bin because of the bacteria, the harmful bacteria and the pathogens, because they're not herbivores. And then troubleshooting, main thing is odors. Like if you notice a nasty smell coming, whether it be from your worm bin or your backyard bin, it's probably going anaerobic. You're probably too heavy on your nitrogen, and you want to balance it out with some browns. Even a couple shovels full of dirt can help absorb that excess moisture and help correct the problem. That's pretty much it. I think that's composting in a nutshell.
And she gave you a great quote. I'll give you guys another. So whether it be backyard composting, worm composting, store-bought compost, whatever that looks like, always remember that the best compost is going to be the garden of shadow. You may be asking why the garden of shadow, because that means you're there and you're doing it. So you're exercising your science. And if the shadow is there, that means you're the one doing it. So let that be your best compost period.
Yeah, I like that. For the best fertilizer, the garden shadow. Yeah, that's a good one too, because you know, as we address, like, and not to scare anybody off from gardening, because it's a hugely rewarding endeavor, but we just like to encourage everybody to go into it with a lot of humility, I guess, probably. Just like anything. Anything.
Be kind to yourself. And it's every day is a learning process. Every day is a learning curve, even when you know it. So
so we should probably segue into the food justice and food sovereignty part of it.
Guys,
you guys heard?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm actually just going to go off script a little bit because we've had a couple of questions in the chat about composting in particular, and I figure while we're on topic, does that make sense? I can also save them for the end, but
no, that's perfect.
No, this is good. It's a good question.
Yeah. So we had a question from Kendall. She said, or he, excuse me, when you say paper products, can you put soiled paper like used napkins or printed? I know you mentioned the glossy magazines, but what about sort of soiled napkins, soiled paper?
So you would want to avoid it if they're soiled with like grease from meat. Anything too oily, you would want to avoid, or cheese, you know, so like a greasy pizza box shouldn't go in. Kind of the same rule that applies to recycling, right? So like with a pizza box, you're not supposed to put in the part with the grease stain. The same would apply with your compost.
Awesome, thanks for that. And then Curtis asked, or they said, in the past, I've chopped into smaller pieces whatever I try to compost and even tried blending. I can't tell if it helps speed up the process or does nothing. Is it necessary?
It's not necessary, but it is helping to speed up the process, especially if you're using a blender. That's going to help even more. So really, the smaller inputs, the faster they'll break down. So,
and even with that, how she mentioned eggshells a bit earlier. With the eggshells, you just know they're going to take forever to break down.
Yeah, so with the eggshells, some people like, you know, and this is another approach I take to teaching composting is really you can get as wonky about it as you want to, you know, because it is like really like master composters who know the subject matter inside and out and produce consistently beautiful compost. It's a very rewarding endeavor. You know, the science to it is fascinating and it's satisfying as we've been communicating. But you can also be a lazy composter. I think I fall somewhere in between, and he'll take the role of lazy composter. But you know, you need to do what fits your lifestyle, and that's why I said it might take longer, and that's okay. You're still doing it. But yeah, the smaller the pieces, the quicker it'll break down.
Awesome. Okay, and then Curtis also asked, well, actually, I'm going to save that one for a second because Rachel asked if your lawn trimming, this is a greens and browns question, if your lawn trimmings dry out, do they become browns instead of greens?
Yes, great question. And the same goes for anything. So like leaves, when they're fresh, they're greens, and once they dry out, they're browns. So they go from nitrogen to carbon. Lawn clipping, same thing. Straw is carbon, whereas hay is a little bit closer to nitrogen. So these are, yeah, that's exactly right.
I have a question, actually, now that we're talking about hay, and I've composted with those big hay bales. Would that be, would you consider that more of a green or a brown?
Hay is kind of somewhere in between. So straw would be brown. Hay is, it would depend on how fresh it is. It's somewhere in between. I've heard it called both, browns and greens. And there are a few things that are in that gray area because if you know, there's people who break it down by ratio, like the elemental components, right, of each of these ingredients. If you go searching, you can find those and we'll break it down. Some of them are somewhere in between.
Got it. Cool. Curtis also asked, with worm tea, does it require bubbling or oxygenation through bubbling?
So you can. There's different ways of making it. So worm tea, just because I didn't mention that. So there's, with the worm composting system, oh, and I did actually want to, if you wanted to make your own at home, a really easy way to, because you could purchase a worm bin. Like we sell them through the county program, but you can make them really cheaply with a couple of 5-gallon buckets, and you would drill drainage holes in your top bucket and air holes in the lid and around the top, and then you would leave the bottom bucket intact, and you would put your worms and your feedstocks in the top bucket, and what would drain into that bottom bucket is what we call the leachate. And leachate is the liquid byproduct of worm composting. It's not the same thing as worm tea. A lot of people say that it is, but it's not. It's a passive byproduct. It may not actually hold any inherent value. It's hard to know what bacteria is present in it. So we don't really consider worm leachate, the passive collection from the decomposition process, as anything very worthwhile. Worm tea, however, you make by the simplest way to make it is to take, I think it's 1 part worm castings or vermicompost, the finished product from your worm bin. And again, like backyard compost, it's finished when it's brown and crumbly and it looks like soil. You take 1 part that, I believe it's 3 parts water, but you might need to look that up. I don't have my cheat sheet with me. And you mix them together, and over 24 hours, you can just stir that mixture a few times, and that's the easiest way to make it. The other way you can make it is by using like a fish tank pump or something that's continually pumping more oxygen into it, and that is kind of the way to make it even better or more effective. You've oxygenated it more. Really important with worm tea is that you use it quickly. I think it's like within 1 to 3 days, so that all of the healthy bacteria present are still thriving in it.
Awesome. Excellent. Exciting stuff. All right, one last question with compost, and if anybody has any other questions, put them in the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourselves. Rachel's saying she has chickens. How much of their poop should she add?
That's another common question I get that's also tough to answer. With a backyard thing, we would only recommend putting that in a backyard composting system, not a worm system. But so you had a backyard composter or a pile, that's really high in nitrogen. So the main thing is to make sure you're still keeping it in balance with the carbon. So if you have so much poop litter, then that could be, problematic because it could possibly cause it to heat up too much. But if you have a good amount of browns to balance it out with, then you can probably just put it all in there. If you're concerned, you could purchase a compost thermometer, which is just an extra long thermometer, and you insert it into the center of the pile where it gets the hottest. You want to make sure it's not getting too high, above 150 degrees, because the nitrogen in those chicken droppings will increase the heat of the pile.
Awesome. Thank you. Any last questions, y'all, about composting in particular, nitty gritty?
I don't know if this is like a silly question, but do you add like dirt to your compost bin? If like I'm thinking about doing a worm composting, so would I add anything like that to it or no?
Yeah, that's not a silly question at all. Actually, when you're starting off a worm bin, it's recommended you add just a scoopful of dirt or even sand, because that gives them some grit so they can process the waste through their gizzard, kind of like a chicken, right? So you can start with a little bit. Beyond that, it's not really considered a feedstock for compost, but I have used it as a way to correct anaerobic conditions. So like when our pile is getting when we've just been too heavy on the food scraps, and I start to smell the odor, then I do add some dirt. But generally speaking, you don't need to add it, put it that way, unless you're correcting something or getting it started.
And who asked that question?
Ryan.
Ryan, that was a beautiful question. And just remember, there's no silly question. The only silly question is the one not asked. Always remember that. So that was a beautiful question.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely.
All right.
Any other questions?
Question. If you have if you think a disease is starting to, in one section of your garden, what's the best way to isolate it? I mean, do you just pull the plant out and try and just get rid of it? Or can you treat the soil in a not so harmful way that kills everybody?
I didn't hear the first part. If what's in there?
So
if you think you have a disease that's...
Disease. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So the best practice to start with is crop rotation. So we call it crop rotation, but it applies even within any size garden. And that's just that you don't plant the same plant or even from the same family of plants in the same section for at least 3, even 5 years. So when you plan out your garden, if you're planting seasonally and you're planting annuals, then you want to remember what you planted from one year to the next so that you can be strategic, because the same types of diseases and pests attack the same generally the same families of plants, and they do harbor in the soil. Now, if you do have a consistent or persistent disease problem in your soil, then you can do soil solarization, which is you need to do it when it's hot. So it's ideally done, you know, in the heat of the summer. You get your soil wet, you cover it with clear plastic, you weight it down, and you basically let it bake. And I don't remember offhand exactly how long, but it's a good period of time. So that will allow your field, even though we're probably talking about scale, will be out of production for maybe 4 to 6 weeks. But that's a good way to kill off any persistent diseases in the soil. All good. Should we move on? Okay. Anything tickling your fancy that you want to?
I know we're going to get into food sovereignty. So again, with me understanding this term and still being very important to me in a number of ways, I think it's somewhat like understanding the anatomy of the brain in a sense. You know, you have the amygdala, the occipital lobe, hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, and I think the same goes to say about food sovereignty. Understanding the anatomy of the term, because it is very grandiose. And for me personally, when I think about food systems, Erin and I are actually in conversations with LAUSD about a potential program project. And food systems, we're looking at connecting not only the local residents there with the local market there, because they already harvest locally. And it's giving the neighborhood and the residents the power of understanding where the food comes from, first and foremost, and, you know, creating that interest, because I give this reference. You have a young child who is in school and the teacher is telling him you have to take psychology, but the kid doesn't want to take psychology, but the kid is interested in mind-bending movies. Well, you let the kid see Get Out by Jordan Peele, or let him see the series of Twilight Zone from Rod Serling. You understand now that psychology feeds into that. Now you gain the child's interest. And I think the same thing goes to say with food, because if you teach a child what they're putting into their system, now they're more inclined to be more appreciative of the process and more so what they eat and the quality of what they eat. Because me, I'm somewhat fit. I didn't come from a bad eating family. I didn't have unhealthy eating habits. But being with Erin, you know, for the most part, we really are vegan, but we eat meat when the kids are here for the most part. My understanding, my appreciation for all that I eat now is more than what I ever thought it would be, because it's not that I didn't care about it, but it's different when you actually understand what you're putting into your body. So, you know, I mean, that's getting off topic, but that's the main thing I'm pulling from food sovereignty, food systems, you know, giving the people the power back to control, you know, the distribution, to control, you know, how those mechanisms within that term are constructed, handled, and dispersed amongst their community. So it's a very broad term, very specific term, but that's what I'm putting from food sovereignty.
Yeah, and you know, the school garden connection is important, and you know, obviously, ideally, every school would have a thriving garden where the kids are actually learning the hands-on skills. We talked a lot about purpose, you know, in our meeting with the principal of our local middle school. You know, it's a tough school. Like it's a very, very economically disadvantaged population. Many of the students live in the local housing projects, so it's a challenge to keep these students engaged, and it's a challenge to keep any students engaged. But you know, particularly when you're working with a population who has a whole other set of challenges that they're coming from and dealing with, and so the conversation all just kept coming back to how do you make these kids feel purposeful? How do you, and she had all these great examples, like, yeah, we got so-and-so helping with the lighting, because they have a dance magnet, they have some sort of performing arts magnet, and like the most challenging kids, the ones who the teachers have all but written off, suddenly are extremely helpful and extremely motivated. And so yes, a lot of it is coming from giving that hands-on learning, that motivation, and what we see as such a crucial component to garden education is really bringing in the food justice element to it, because I've been involved with school gardening programs for years, and they're lovely, but usually it's an inherited curriculum or curriculum that I'm delivering somebody else's curriculum. It's arts and crafts, and it's cute little snacks, and that's all fine and well, but let's talk to these kids about why is everybody telling you that you should be eating healthier, and yet is the local farmers market affordable for your family? What I know that this market moved into your neighborhood, and they're selling these boutique healthy foods, but I think the term is a food mirage. I just discovered that term, like gentrification, right? You have a neighborhood, a certain population, fixed income, and then something moves in. Oh no, it's available. We're serving this. We have this healthy option, but how is it priced? Is it priced right? Does it make sense? And that really kind of steers into this great idea that I touched upon earlier with, this idea that it's kind of this fallacy that small family farmers are going to save our food system. And that's just not the reality for most people. That paradigm needs to be shifted completely, because yes, what's the standard is not working. It's not working environmentally. It's not working in terms of health, because you've got so much land dedicated to commodity crops that aren't actually going into producing healthy, sustaining food, but rather processed foods. Markets have been created for those commodity crops. And then you have this alternative that I think has been presented to us now for a while. I'd say like kind of going on a couple decades now. You got like the Michael Pollins of the world, and the old Salish-Tin, or how do you say his name? That's not the answer for people living in Willowbrook, or Watts, or Compton, or San Bernardino. It's a mirage. Like, it's not going to fix the problems for those communities, because where's their local family farm that's serving them and making it accessible? And it's just, and so I get irritated with that idea that, that kind of preachy, like, it's the consumer's fault that our health is so bad, like, if everybody just realized they should pay a little bit more for sustainably farmed produce, then that would fix everything. No, that's BS. It's not an answer.
And that's the problem. And that's the main thing, because people obviously want to eat healthy. Not only are you overpricing goods to where families can afford them, you already have this illusion that you're sacrificing taste, because you're not eating what you grew up on. You're not eating these steaks, these ribeyes, your traditional food of your family's heritage. So it's all of this white noise that keep people away from actually doing better when it comes to the foods that they eat. And to Erin's point, no, it's not the consumer's fault, because most people aren't being taught this information. Like, we talk about this often, like, exposure is the beginning of the process, because exposure then creates experience. And if you can get this person or these persons to experience better, now they're more educated. Because if you look at it in that light, experience trumps education, because you can't be fully educated until you have the experience of being exposed to greater. And it's a lot of irritation around that, and that's why me and Erin and I are so passionate about what we do, because even though I'm, again, new to this sector, I'm not that new to where I don't see where this system is broken. And it's people like us, it's people like you all on this call, we can fix it, and we just have to make a lot of noise to fix it.
Yeah, we always say that we're basically trying to raise the next generation of revolutionaries, but couching it in this school garden model.
because you can't despise small beginnings. Like, everyone started somewhere. If you don't believe that, ask Mike or Mark Zuckerberg. Like, everything starts small, and then it grows, because we talk about this also. When you offer something of meaning, people will bend over backwards to help you. They gravitate towards it like a magnet. and they just want to be a part of it. And as long as you're doing meaningful work for humanity and you're making it yours, because you don't have to recreate the wheel. These things have already been done. These concepts are already out there. We can critique it, bring it abreast to real time to make it make sense and make it yours. And that's not hard. People just don't believe they can do it because they're not educated to believe it. They're not wired that way.
Yeah, and people are receptive. You know, like what we found is when we're all feeling it. You know, I think worldwide, like we obviously we're in the midst of a movement, and in many ways, and the nobody can get away with turning a blind eye to the inequity. It's just too apparent. So how do we seize upon this opportunity and actually change systems? And yeah, fortunately, there's a lot of great organizations doing this work. We're just one more of them.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a hope-inducing. But we've got a lot of entrenched systems that we're working against. And, you know, we just had Indigenous Peoples Day pass, and I saw all of the Instagram locations being changed to Congo land. And yeah, that's beautiful. Let's remember that all the time, you know. Let's like look at how the land in this country has been repurposed, and not just how that's affecting the planet, but how it's affecting our bodies and how it's affecting communities. Because it's not just, you know, here in LA, the most obvious example is real estate, right? Like we could have more community gardens, we could have more community farms if real estate weren't so ridiculous, if the developers didn't have the stranglehold that they do on our elected officials, if money weren't so powerful, right? That's the situation here, but the situation is the same, you know, in the Great Plains, in the Midwest. You know, it's just the only difference is there. It's the stranglehold is the huge acreage of commodity crops, and just it's all a misuse of resources, and it's all capitalist based, you know. So how do we shift that? You know, how do we create a greater movement? That's really what we're in.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that many of you are on the same page, and probably were even before we started talking about this. So, yeah. Yeah.
So long story short version, what we're saying, don't look to fix the systems that are in place, because they're in place this way for a reason.
Yeah. The system's not broken.
Yeah.
We always say the system's not broken. It was designed this way.
It's our job to dismantle them.
Oppression is the goal.
Yeah. Dismantle them. So, you know.
Yeah.
But, any questions? Anyone have anything to inquire about?
I'll give it a second in case anybody wants to jump in front of me. Anybody? Okay, I so appreciate everything that you guys are saying, and everything that you're saying really resonates, and I have not heard, this is the first time that I've heard that the system is not broken, because oftentimes in these conversations when we're talking about food sovereignty, food justice, food access, we really focus on the fact that we live in a broken system and the food system is broken. And you're right, we actually have a really highly functioning food system, if you sort of reframe it and think about it in this with this different perspective, because the goal is oppression, and if it wasn't, then we would live in a much different system. So I thank you for bringing that reframe to light here.
All credit to this guy.
It's us.
Yeah. But I think that's the first time I heard it too. Was Emanuel.
That is heavy. That's heavy. So I also want to echo that that this sort of idea that we blame the consumer for not being willing to spend, $28 a pound on a grass-fed piece of beef, or that we blame the consumer for not going to the farmer's market, or for whatever, all of the reasons that we blame the consumer. I'm curious for people here who are like feeling the pressure. I know that especially students who care so much and are maybe learning about this for the first time and really want to help hear things like this, and they're like, oh my God, like what do I do? Like, how do I fix this if like going to the farmer's market isn't the answer, or do, you know, XYZ isn't the, spending $4 a pound on an orange or whatever. What are some things that students can do to help support food access in populations and areas that don't have good food access?
Well, I mean, there's a few ways, and I don't feel like there's an easy answer to that question because, you know, it all involves work. And, you know, I always say the people who I really admire are the people who are working to change policy. You know, Emanuel and I, we're educators, we're urban farmers. What I don't personally have expertise in is policy work, and I think that's crucially important. So anybody who's doing that, I have a great deal of admiration for. And if that's your bag, if that's your wheelhouse, I would encourage going in that direction. In terms of a hands in the dirt kind of approach, you know, I would look for opportunities to start more gardens. I mean, it really is as simple as that. Start more urban farms, start more urban gardens. There's a beautiful example right now in Willowbrook. It's the Vanguard Community Garden. It's like 3 acres. And you know, you just got people there growing so much food for their communities. That was a county project though, and those people were just lucky to know about it. You know, they just happened to get on board early. Some people got 8 giant plots there and doing beautiful farming work, you know, for their communities. And that needs to be happening on a scale of 1,000. You know what I mean? Like that. And so again, that's hard because of land access. You know, if there's opportunities to expand education around EBT and WIC, you know, folks who are receiving aid and which farmers markets accept it. Most of them do, you know, so just education around that I think can be helpful. And then nutritional education is crucially important. That's why it's such an integral part of any garden curriculum. You know, the curriculum we're developing, you know, I like to cook, you like to cook, but we're going to bring in experts, you know, who can actually deliver, who know how to teach cooking and food preparation, because that's important too, you know.
That's a whole other realm of its own.
What do I do with this food? You know, so.
Yeah, and please hear that, guys, because you can be very good at all these things, but we are firm believers are, even if you can do everything, it's not wise to do it. A goal, especially within this space, is to simplify, delegate, outsource if you can, and if you can't outsource, you need to amass as much information as you can that actually has utility, because at the end of the day, be kind to yourself.
And do what you do best.
Yeah, be kind to yourself. And she mentioned policy. There's a beautiful organization, Roots for Peace.
Yes.
There's a young expert named Ellie, and Ellie is one to make contact with. And I'm telling you guys this because she is on the forefront of making change. And you just have to be loud about these things because we can't depend on the government. And it's a very cliche thing to say, but to your question, Alicia, like, that's what we have to do. We have to be loud. Now, being loud, that doesn't mean be destructive. It doesn't mean being belligerent. But no, you can be loud. Start petitions, get signatures, get voices heard, you know, make movements. We're just in this era now that people are afraid to spark something because they're afraid of the repercussion, but the repercussion is worth it if everyone else can receive the reward from what you're trying to do for your people. So it's just find your way and just be kind to yourself in the process. Learn what you can do most effectively, do that well, and what you can't do, delegate it.
Yeah, and you know, kind of bouncing off of that, the relationship building part is so important because every opportunity that's come our way has just come from us putting effort into like reaching out to people that we believe in what they're doing, and we just say, hey, we just want to talk to you, we just like what you're doing. And so because it is intimidating, you know, for me to say, yeah, go start community farms. Like, if you want to change the system, like, okay, where the hell do I begin doing that? You know, so that's when you start getting strategic, looking around. Okay, who owns this level? Which, you know, there's tools you can find lots that are county-owned land. You can start, and everything's on the internet, right? If you search closely enough, you can find information, and then okay, well, which department at the county do I reach out to, or which city council person do I reach out to? You know, it's an election year. Who's looking to have a feather in their cap? You know, who can I partner with on this? And that's really what we're learning right now, because we do want to work on a large scale, and so it's okay. Which politicians, which assembly person do I talk to from the state assembly if it's not the city council person? So that's all new to me because I was never interested in politics, but
it's all politics.
It's all politics.
And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Yeah. Because one thing that comes with partners is politics. And one thing that comes with politics is partners. Learn what you can, put it to use, because you can do what you can, but you only have so much reach. That's why we're telling you to be kind to yourself during the process, because you can only take yourself so far, and you will always need people to help you get to where you're trying to go. Because there are people who are doing what you're trying to do, and they don't mind giving you the answers. They don't mind giving you the jewelry that you're asking for. But most people are just too afraid to ask. Just open your mouth and ask.
Yeah, we experienced that very thing in advocating for a garden at Cal State LA. You know, I mean, what you're saying is what many of the people on this call really like, you know, rolled up their sleeves and got out on campus when we were still allowed to be in real life and got petitions and talked to people about gardening. And it's great to hear you say that, you know, that it's part of the process. It's also amazing to hear you say that I've heard from many of my very dearest friends are farmers, and they do not want to be advocating for policy. They want to be on the farm. They want to be growing food. They want to be making sure that they are experts in animal husbandry. They want to make sure that they're experts in compost, that they're experts in growing kale, growing food, and supplying food. They don't have time to show up to policy meetings and to show up to working group meetings and to advocate, but they need advocates, like, desperately. So hearing you talk about those of you on this call who are interested in policy, and maybe we've had people in this club too who like really didn't like getting their hands dirty, and they didn't really want to be outside, but they knew the power of this kind of organization. And they found places where they were going to be effective and where they could be effective. So that it's really good to hear you say that. And yeah, being interested in edible gardening and in urban agriculture and in farming and knowing how important these things are right now doesn't mean that you have to be a farmer, and it doesn't mean that you have to be a gardener. It just means that you're part of it and you get it. So
you have to understand what's in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, you can be part of the movement.
Yeah, understand who
in
you are.
In many ways, yeah.
And just, I'll continue to say it, just be kind to yourself. Because you don't have to force anything. Just understand what's in your wheelhouse.
Grant writing.
Yeah, grant writing.
Any grant writers out there? Look at the bond measures that have passed and what grants are associated with those. There's a lot of money out there.
Yeah.
A lot of taxpayer money.
Yeah, find your niche. And if you can't find it, create it. Again, we just believe there's no excuse, and it's not meant to be easy. Whatever you're trying to, you know, obtain throughout your process, your stretch of goals, it's not meant to be easy. It's hard for a reason, but it's worth it when you know why you're doing it. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm curious what you guys think about, you know, we talk about urban agriculture a lot, and there's been a lot of talk about urban agriculture can urban agriculture feed cities? Like, is urban agriculture a viable obviously, you know, the problems that we have, the way that we have to dismantle the system is going to have to come from a lot of different angles. It's not just going to be about one solution. You know, we need lots of different people all working together to solve these things. Do you think that urban agriculture and really investing and fighting for more urban agriculture, especially in the city of Los Angeles, could viably feed participants, could viably feed the city? Or is it just a way to communicate better about fruits and vegetables? Like, what do you think about urban ag in LA?
I think it's only going to be a piece of the puzzle because developers do have such a stranglehold here. You know, the urban agricultural incentive zone is kind of a joke. You know what I mean? Like in terms of what it's really facilitating.
Talk to the people on this call about what the urban ag incentive zone is.
Well, if I understand it correctly, it provides certain incentives to property owners to allow for growing food on their property, but the incentives aren't that great. It doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of economic sense, especially given the competing interests for those properties. Now, Detroit is an excellent example. And it was a few years ago that I read this article. It might have been in Food Tank. I don't remember which publication, but if I recall correctly, it was extremely inspiring. I wonder if it's referenced in that book, if Tracy McMillan referenced it in American Way of Eating. Because she did spend time in Detroit.
I think she did.
Yeah, I think Detroit actually did manage to create enough urban farms that it was a viable means of feeding their population. But Detroit's not LA. You know, the
vegetation is
well, it's not LA in terms of weather, it's not LA in terms of population, and it's not LA in terms of property value. So yeah, that's why I say that urban farming is just a piece of the puzzle. But you know, we do have, there is open land here. It's outside of Los Angeles. You know, there are more affordable places to live outside of city limits. We fantasize about it all the time. But you know, it's maybe going a little bit further afield and maybe getting a hold of some of that bond money and purchasing land and starting a farm outside of city limits that can still serve the people not too far away who need it. I mean, I'm kind of spitballing here, but yeah, I mean, land value here is a huge obstacle that I think not insurmountable. It just means that actual urban farms in city limits are only going to be able to feed so many people.
Totally. Great answer. Does anybody else have any other thoughts, comments, questions, inspirations that you want to share if you're vibing wherever you are? Anyone?
I would like to ask some question.
Yeah.
So, I did have a question on like agricultural urban farming, and I was wondering if you guys use like any like minerals for your soil, or like besides composting, or azomite for like nutrients for your veggies or whatever you grow.
Yeah, I mean, we use bone meal and blood meal. Not often, but when we feel like we need an extra boost. But for the most part, you know, like I said, we might lean more toward being lazy composters. We have our period. You're not a lazy gardener.
No, I may be a lot of things, but a lazy gardener is not one.
But I'm sometimes a lazy gardener. So, you know, like the state of our main garden right now, it's not great. It's kind of bare, you know, because we weren't totally on top of it with our seeds starting. We didn't end up with as many seedlings as we wanted. And so we're going to have to go back to the drawing board on some of that.
This is why we say, be kind to yourself.
Yeah, we're not beating ourselves up over it.
But it happens. It ebbs and flows. And it happens to the best of us. So be kind to yourself. And we're not just saying that like
yeah.
Like we really mean that, because it's very hard to make yourself shrink. And life is doing that already. Your circumstances and situations are trying to shrink. Don't you shrink yourself. So just be kind to yourself.
Yeah, so, you know, and he helps me out with that a lot. 'Cause I get down on myself. I'm like, I'm a garden teacher. Like, this is not a showpiece right now. You know, my garden is not a showpiece, but it will be when time appropriates. And so I'm kind of getting off that tangent here, but yeah, I do think soil amendments are great, as long as they're organic. You know, I always say, please don't use any chemical fertilizers ever. But as long as they're organic soil amendments, I think there's a lot of great ones out there. You know, depending on what you're trying to do. But in terms of when I say, not really even half jokingly, that I'm a lazy gardener, I usually don't even fertilize at all. I just add compost. And you know, nice thing is that our garden has really good soil to begin with, because the flip side of that is that it's heavily shaded. We've got a big olive tree in the middle. But the nice part of that is we have a lot of organic matter naturally falling into the garden. We practice polyculture, so we have different kinds of plants around the garden, a lot of life in the soil, a lot of insects in the soil. So I truly feel like our soil doesn't need much, but it really depends on what your soil needs.
Yeah. Because even with that, how she just mentioned our one garden, and the soil is beautiful. We have plots out in Willowbrook at Vanguard Community Garden. We didn't amend that soil. It was clay, but it brought forth an oasis. Yeah. So it's like,
soil will surprise you.
That's why
for better and for worse.
Yeah. So just be kind to yourself, because you can do everything right. The Mother Nature's gonna say, "Oh, you think you got it? No, let me show you." So just be kind to yourself.
In terms of that clay that you're talking about, our plot also has crazy clay. I was messing around with it today, and I squeezed it in my hand, opened my hand, and it just stuck. I was like, oh, I have lots of clay. Did you guys, when you started your new garden, did you do soil testing? In parts of East LA and in South LA, there's pretty significant soil contamination, and there's been lots of toxic dumps, and lead has been found. Did you guys address that at all? I know that's also can be a barrier for people who want to start new gardens or thinking about growing vegetables.
Yeah, it was a concern. So, you know, my involvement with the Willowbrook Garden with Vanguard started through work a couple of years ago. Poor Emanuel moved here. So when we were first introduced to the garden, the firm I worked for basically asked us to help launch it, right, to relaunch it and bring in landscapers to get it in shape. So the first thing I said was, has the soil been tested? Because, you know, there's oil fields around there, and it was definitely a concern. So we did test the soil. It was fine. It came back fine. But, you know, I do think soil testing certainly makes sense if you have reason to believe the soil could be contaminated. If you're working with a large area and soil is contaminated, remediation, there's certain things you can plant that are said to help with remediation, pulling the toxins, the contaminants out. But in some cases, it may be easier to just, you know, build up and go with raised beds and purchase soil. I know it's a big expense, but if it's a major concern, sometimes that's really the best answer. But in terms of the clay, I will say this, and, you know, Emanuel just kind of illustrated this in his description of our gardens at Vanguard. The nice thing about clay, I mean, it's such a pain to work with, but it actually is generally pretty rich in nutrients. So that's why our garden performed the way it did. So, you know, it's more work, but it might still do well by you.
Wonderful.
It's not like sandy soil doesn't really have much nutrients. It's all mineral content, you know, and the water runs right through. But clay actually has more nutrients in it, naturally present.
Cool. Does anybody else have any last questions? It's 3:35, so, you know, we've got some more time still if anybody wants to chime in.
Yeah, I had a question regarding your garden locations for Armada. Are you currently allowing volunteers to help you, or is there like restrictions for COVID that are still in place?
So it would just really be dependent upon the situation. We're more than welcome to share our space with anyone who's interested. obviously, taking precautions to COVID and keep everyone safe. The good part is we're outside. So
we're working with the Girl Scout right
yeah,
now.
we're working with the Girl
Girl
Scouts.
Scout Gold Award project. So we just wear masks.
Yeah.
We work with the gal from
oh yeah.
San Marcos College.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're open to it, but I mean, I'll be very honest. We haven't planted at Vanguard yet for the cool season. We're deciding what our next move is going to be there. So yeah, so like we're actually in a place where we're kind of struggling to find work for our Girl Scout to do in our local garden. But yeah, please do keep in touch because the goal is to get back to where we were this past spring and summer, where we just had lots firing on all the cylinders. Yeah,
forest. Like Tarzan, Jane, like everybody, my family was like just swinging through like we had a forest. And again,
very abundant.
To her point, we don't really have much now because of the heat, because of our presence, the lack thereof. But
work ramping up.
Yeah, work ramping up. Our projects ramping up. But we're kind to ourselves, and we understand that there's some blows.
We're being strategic about what our next move will be there, because that's where we have the most real estate. That's where we have like two very large sunny plots. Yeah, that's true. We do have the third one where we can actually produce a decent amount of food, and that's where we're doing our food relief growing. Fire our local garden here at Ocean View Farms. Again, it's so shady, but it's more kind of like our pleasure garden in a way.
But it's beautiful though. And again, if anyone ever wanted to make a trip, obviously we can coordinate there.
Oh yeah.
Because it's such a great collective space of beauty. And it's a great walkthrough. It's not just our garden, but the entire walkthrough, if you guys are familiar.
It's a nice place to visit, whether you're volunteering or not. So yeah, and we're all looking for opportunities to connect. So please do reach out if you're interested.
For your garden locations, they're not on your website, right? Yet, or we would just need an email
to
find out the location.
Yeah, because they're not open to the public.
Yeah.
So
right.
We need a and everything.
Yeah. Okay.
You got a pitchfork, people outside charging $10 a pop, so you want to get
for a pumpkin patch or something, huh?
Amazing. Sounds beautiful. And we will definitely be in touch with you to hopefully connect. And we would love to see it and love to visit in a safe way. Anybody else?
I kind of had a follow-up question that backtracks to food security and composting and everything. How do you keep people, like, I assume that you deal with a lot of people on a daily basis. So how do you just keep people motivated and inspired to keep moving forward? Because you said that the process isn't easy. So just what are like some tips that you have to keep people moving forward?
Right now, we're mostly keeping each other motivated on a daily basis. because nobody's like school's not in person yet, so we're really pretty much in meetings and curriculum development mode in terms of what we will be doing at the middle school and at the Boys and Girls Club and the housing project. We're still in the development phase, so that's my answer to that question, but that's really your area of expertise, so I'll really pick up on it, because Emanuel is the motivator. Like, he's literally YouTuber motivator. That's what he does.
That's a great question. And yeah, it's about motivating, but motivation, that goes out the window. Like inspiring yourself, inspiring people. So to answer the question, you just have to understand and know why you're doing what you're doing. And understand that the details of why you're doing it may change, but your reasoning for doing it, that will always anchor you. Like really tuning into why I'm doing it. And again, obviously having goals and having targets that correlate with this rhythmic movement that you're putting into place, so you're not just killing time, because we're very big on being the best steward of time. Like people take time for granted. Like we can mess up a garden with composting, we can kill it, unintentionally, we can spend money, we can blow it. All those things we can recuperate and get it back. You can't get time back. So once you start allocating the time for things, just make sure you are being very meaningful and giving that extreme attention, because waste of time, it's the worst. So just know why you're doing it, stay your course, you know, replicate the gauge your reaction in a sense. Mirror those who are very successful in your eyes, whatever that definition means. Mirror them, mirror their practices. Ask those probing questions that you can then make your own once you start giving answers to people when they ask you. So, you know, life is ever evolving, as are we. And as long as you know why you're doing what you're doing, you become expansive. There's no root to yourself. Like, so I hope that answers your question.
Oh,
Thank you. That's great. Yeah.
We're all buzzing over here. Well, anybody else? Any last questions? No? If you think of questions, if you're like sitting there and you're feeling like, God, I don't have a question now, but as you're, you know, wandering around your own garden or your house and you're thinking about this and you're like, God, I wish I would have asked that. Just feel free to reach out to us as a club or to Armada. You guys, I hope I'll have their Instagram info. We are so grateful that you were able to be here with us today and were able to talk to us. It's just, we're thrilled to be able to make these connections with people like you and to be part of this movement with you. And thank you for leading it and for doing such an amazing job. So on behalf of Cal State LA, our club, and everyone, thank you so, so much.
We thank you all. We're putting our contact information here for you all if you do have those follow-up questions, or if you just want to say hello. Like, we're nice people. I don't care what you said about me. I'm a nice guy. So.
And yeah, we really are just, this is what keeps us going, you know, right now, as I said, as we are in that building stage where we're writing grants and writing curriculum and holding meetings, which is all very inspiring and motivating, but it's these periods of connection and conversation that really feed us. So we do really thank you all for inviting us to do this.
Awesome. Yeah. And if, you know, if we can ever be of any help to you, I also want to extend, like, please reach out to us. Like, we're also here for you and to support you in whatever way we can. So, and we hope to be able to do that for a really long time, that this will be a like long sustaining relationship. So
thank you for that. And because we know you mean it, because people put those words in a sentence and they make it sound really pretty, but we know you mean it.
We know who we're dealing with.
Yeah.
We thank you. And
you.
we'll definitely be in touch, and we're excited to come visit the garden.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we're really excited for that.
Cool. All right, you guys. Well, before you all go, Hannah is going to announce our raffle winner so that you
Wrong.
put into use all of this new knowledge and get compost bins going. So I'm going to hand it over to Hannah.
Thank you, Alicia. I just want to say thank you to Erin and Emanuel for being here today. It's been a really great event. Could I share my screen, Alicia? All right. Can you all see this wheel?
Yes.
Okay.
I like it.
So I just want to mention ASI members and EPC members are not eligible to win. So sorry about that, and sorry for not mentioning that earlier. But we will get started now, and I will announce the first winner. The first winner will win a $25 gift card to Target.
I didn't know that.
The winner is Sydney. I'm not sure if she's here still, but I'll send winner's message later. I will contact them all later. Next winner will also receive a $25 Target gift card.
Definitely needs to be back. Really.
Congratulations, April. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. I'm going to remove the winners from the wheel. All right, the next winner will win a $50 Amazon gift card.
Guys, and we have to step out. We are apologizing for that, but it was a pleasure to connect with you guys, and please reach out if you have questions.
I have to take pictures of
Yeah, we
that.
have to get
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye,
We hope to talk soon. Bye.
You will take care, guys.
And the next winner is Cindy.